California, we sure have been through something like never before. We all know COVID-19 deeply affected every aspect of our lives. Go to calhope.org to live chat with one of the incredible listeners or call their warm line at 1-833-317-HOPE. Hope lives here in California.
You have the firearm in your right hand, correct?
Yes.
You didn't behave like someone who had just saved Sergeant Johnson's life, did you?
I was very distraught. I just shot somebody. I've never done that.
You didn't run down the street and try to save Dante Wright's life, did you?
No.
You were focused on what you had done, because you had just killed somebody.
I'm sorry it happened.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. Thank you so much for joining me in the second hour here of our show. And we have big news coming out of Minneapolis tonight from the trial of former officer Kim Potter. Both sides have rested. All the evidence is in, and closings are scheduled for Monday morning. We are expecting the jury to begin deliberating sometime Monday afternoon. Now, before the defense rested their case today, the defendant, Kim Potter, took the stand in her own defense. Potter is charged with killing 20-year-old Dante Wright during a traffic stop she describes as chaotic. And during her direct examination, she walked the jury through the events of the day she shot Dante Wright. And noticeable was that she avoided saying his name at any point during her testimony, calling him simply the driver. She appeared stoic on direct, with her attorney Earl Gray walking her through the events in an almost rote manner. There were moments of emotion as she described the shooting, but on direct at least, she never seemed terribly remorseful and really never said sorry. But cross, that was a different story, folks. During her cross-examination, Potter actually broke down, at one point finally apologizing for what she had done, telling the court that she never meant to hurt anybody. Let's listen to Potter taking the stand in her own defense.
State your full name and spell it.
Kimberly, Kimberlyannan, Potter, Potter.
In training, did you attend all the training sessions required by the Brooklyn Center Police Department while you were there?
Yes.
Did you ever use a taser, use it by actually shooting it in all of your years' career as a law enforcement officer?
I would take my taser out on rare occasions, but I don't believe I ever deployed it.
I'm going to go now to April 11th, 2021, a Sunday. And you surely remember that day, is that correct?
Yes. Officer Lucky and I were driving south on Zane Avenue North. We were talking about pursuit policies, doing some regular FTO training, and he observed a vehicle in the turn lane with a blinker on inappropriately.
And was that the white Buick?
Yes. We discussed a little bit of suspicious activity. He noticed a pine tree or air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, and the tabs were expired. The driver came back with a suspended driver's license, gross misdemeanor, bench warrant for weapons, and a protection order. I heard him ask the driver to step out of the vehicle a couple of times.
And did the driver step out of the vehicle finally?
Finally, he asked Officer Lucky a couple of times what was going on, and Officer Lucky said he would explain to him.
When he got out of the car?
Yes.
And so did the driver get out of the car?
Yes. Officer Lucky had him turn around, and I think he was still asking what was going on. Sergeant John.
Who's he?
The driver.
Go ahead.
And Sergeant Johnson and Lucky told him he was under arrest, and I told him he had a warrant. Officer Lucky started to say something about, don't do that, don't tense up, stop doing that. And then it just went chaotic. I remember a struggle with Officer Lucky and the driver at the door. The driver was trying to get back into the car. I went around Officer Lucky as they're trying to get back in the door. I'm between the door and Officer Lucky and the driver. And the driver's getting into the car. They're still struggling, and I can see Sergeant Johnson and the driver struggling over the gear shift, because I can see Johnson's hand, and then I can see his face. We were struggling. We were trying to keep him from driving away. It just went chaotic. And then I remember yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him.
And you started carrying a taser on your duty belt regularly as of 2005, right?
Yes.
But at a minimum, in addition to all the other training you had, you would have had taser training year after year for at least the last 19 years, right?
Yes.
You were made aware during PowerPoint after PowerPoint after PowerPoint that drawing and firing the wrong weapon can happen, right?
We were told it wasn't something that they expounded on.
You were told that.
Yes.
And you signed documentation every year you were certified acknowledging that you knew the risks, received and reviewed the materials required for you to carry that taser, correct?
Yes, I signed the documents.
Is this a picture of your duty belt?
Yes.
You'd agree that the holsters for your taser and your firearm are different, correct?
Yes.
The taser holster is made of plastic, right?
Yes.
You have to push a button, this button right here, and rock it back to get it out of the holster, correct?
Yes.
And your gun holster is made of leather, is that right?
Yes.
And it has a little snap, is that right?
Yeah.
You have drawn your taser multiple times while on duty, correct?
Several times.
You'd agree that you unsnapped your gun holster as you approached, right?
No, I wouldn't agree to that.
You see yourself in that picture,
Yes.
and you see your right hand on the right side of your duty belt.
Yes.
And is your right hand on your firearm here?
It's blurry, but it's possible.
Okay. You never saw a weapon on Mr. Wright, did you?
No.
Never saw a gun.
No.
He never threw a punch, right?
No.
Never kicked anyone.
No.
Never said, "I'm going to kill you."
No.
Never said, "I'm going to shoot you."
No.
Never said, "There's a gun in the car and I'm coming after you."
No.
Okay. Okay, so stopping at 202:01, you have the firearm in your right hand, correct?
Yes.
And you are pointing it directly at Mr. Wright, correct?
Excuse me, Eric, can we have a break? My client is,
Okay. Miss Potter, do you need to take a break? Okay.
And after you shot Dante Wright, you said, "I just shot him, I grabbed the wrong gun and I shot him, I'm going to go to prison, and I killed a boy." You said all those things, right?
I don't remember.
If that's what's in the video, that's what you said, right?
Yes.
You didn't behave like someone who had just saved Sergeant Johnson's life, did you?
I was very distraught. I just shot somebody. I've never done that.
Well, you never asked Sergeant Johnson if he was okay, right?
I don't remember the conversations.
You didn't check in on him at all, right?
I don't know.
Well, you saw the video. When Sergeant Johnson fed you the line, "That guy was trying to take off with me," you didn't bite, right? You didn't respond to that at all, did you?
The video, I was crying. I was in shock.
You'd agree that as a police officer, you have the duty to render aid and communicate information to other officers, right?
Yes.
And it's part of your job to assist those who are hurt or injured, true?
Yes.
And to communicate to other officers what you know about a particular scene, right?
Yes.
Give them whatever information you can to help them do their jobs, to help render assistance, things like that, right?
Yes.
But you didn't do any of those things on April 11th, did you?
No.
You stopped doing your job completely. You didn't communicate what happened over the radio, right?
No.
You didn't make sure any officers knew what you had just done, right?
No.
You didn't run down the street and try to save Dante Wright's life, did you?
No.
You didn't check on the other car that had been hit, did you?
No.
That all happened just down the road from you.
Yes.
You were focused on what you had done, because you had just killed somebody, right?
I'm sorry it happened. I'm so sorry.
All right, we all saw the video at trial. She completely and utterly broke down. I don't know if the jury is ultimately going to hold that against her. But right now, I want to bring in my guest for this hour, civil rights attorney and former civil criminal defense attorney, DeWitt Lacy. DeWitt, it's been a minute. Great to have you back on the show.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Michael. I have a feeling of why you guys invited me here. We'll talk about it.
Well, that's good. I want to get to that in a second. But first, I want to get your impressions of Kim Potter on the stand. I think it's one of those situations that really could go either way. I want to get your thoughts.
I think you're right, and that's exactly what I'm getting at. Look, we know that I'm sitting out here on the West Coast in Los Angeles, right next to the Hollywood Hills, and you want to know if that performance is something that the jury is going to eat up. Well, I can tell you this. They might, okay? We have to look at what the makeup of that jury is, and I'd be remiss to pretend that race is not going to play a factor. There is definitely a racially charged element in this killing of Dante Wright. And what is happening in the courtroom, is it going to be perceived well by the jury? Of course, we don't know. We don't know the jurors. But to me, I think there are some mistakes that they made, which kind of took away from her credibility and able to sell this story.
Well, you know what's interesting? You talk about whether they're buying her story. Again, we don't know whether they bought it or not, but I can tell you this. In the pool notes from the person inside the courtroom, they said the jury wasn't necessarily empathizing with her. You know, there's a way you look when you're hearing someone crying, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't see any of that. So I thought that was very interesting. There was some suggestion from some of our folks online at various platforms that this was maybe a performance, like you may have been suggesting. But I want to take a step back here, DeWitt, because I haven't had you, like I said, on the show for a while. What were your thoughts about this case going into it? Did you think this was a problematic prosecution and maybe shouldn't have been brought, or you thought this was the right thing to do?
I definitely thought she should have been prosecuted, right? This is not an error that you expect of somebody who's been on the force for 26 years. You know, part of the coldness and calculated manner of a more senior officer doesn't necessarily come off well when you're asking for mercy for making a rookie mistake, right? So I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll tell you that's what I think. I think you know, her age and experience is going to play a significant role in how the jury looks at this.
Yeah, I think those are absolutely important factors, and I agree with you. I think just based on the climate, this was a case that needed to be played out in court. But now I want to ask you, and you touched on it in your first answer, there might have been some mistakes made here. What are your thoughts now that the evidence is in and we're expecting closing arguments on Monday morning?
Gotcha. Well, I think, look, one of the tactics that sometimes defense attorneys or even criminal prosecutors use when they're convicting someone is they don't call them by their name. And to have Ms. Potter not recognize this guy's name, right? She could have easily said Mr. Wright, but instead of always characterizing him as this unknown driver, it really kind of, I guess, fails to give value or significance to this person's life that she's taken, or acknowledgement even to the fact of that. And that may set some people the wrong way. I think that's a mistake. They didn't need to do that.
I thought the state picked up on that, and I thought they sort of took it to another level where they, just before we came out of that piece of tape, she was talking about the fact that she didn't go over to help him. She didn't ask about him. She was so worried about herself and what she had just done. I thought the state did a pretty good job of raising that as an issue in this case.
I think you're right. I think you're right. They're highlighting the right issues, saying that whatever action she was doing, she was not performing like a competent or, dare I say, reasonable professional officer would be expected to perform. That is, in the face of an emergency, after there's a shooting, especially if the car has gone off into traffic and hit someone, that the officer would go check on the well-being of that person. They're first responders. That's what their duty is. That's what their job is. The fact that she wasn't carrying out these things that are taught in the most basic police academies suggests that she was far from what the professional standards were, or maybe even careless, reckless.
And you know what, when Dante Wright was shot, the car drove off. And one of the things that she testified to, DeWitt, was that she was afraid for Officer Johnson. She saw fear in his eyes. They saw him wrangling in the car. And I thought the state did a great job of saying, hey, after the event, you didn't even go check on Officer Johnson. You're so worried about his well-being, you didn't check with him and say, hey, are you all right at this point? Because the car did, in fact, drive off. I thought that was a good point made by the state as well. But again, my question is, did they do enough to get a conviction here? We know there's 2 manslaughter charges, first and second. Your thoughts on whether they've done enough to get a conviction here?
I don't know about on the first. The second is more likely, if any, conviction. The second, of course, not requiring the mens rea, right? There doesn't have to be any specific intent. There could just be significantly reckless behavior or some type of disregard that amounted to the wrongful death of Dante Wright, and that would be enough for a conviction. I think that's more likely in this circumstance because who knows how those emotions are playing to the juror. Maybe most of them it's not, but maybe to one it is, and that could really result in some type of compromised verdict. I mean, of course, if they're not, buying it, so to speak, at all, then I think one is on the table.
That's interesting. I think 1 is even more possible than 2, but we'll dig into that in just a little bit. DeWitt, stand by. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, much more from Minneapolis after this break. We hear from a defense's expert on so-called slip and capture errors. He walks us through that controversial theory. And then later in our Talk Back segment, we asked you what you thought about Kim Potter's testimony. Let us know what you think, and we'll share some of your comments later on in the show. You're watching Court TV, your front row seat to justice.